expand the potential spawning grounds for tropical storms and hurricanes in the Atlantic. We look towards the Gulf. It is warming up, and we've had the hot weather over the last couple of weeks, so the temperatures are rising. That could help spawn some tropical storms or hurricanes. Of course, the Western Caribbean looking nice, and even the Southern Atlantic is beginning to warm up. But we start looking back towards the Eastern Caribbean and the Atlantic as things will warm up, and this is where potentially we could see storm development during the month of July. Right now, things are quiet in the Atlantic, but not so in the Pacific. One little weak system here and another rather interesting area through the intertropical convergence zone. We have a tropical depression. It is located right here, just to the south, 370 miles south of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. It is just sitting there and spinning around. Top winds at 35 miles an hour. No great increase in strength anticipated. It should begin to drift towards the west-northwest over the next 24 hours. It could strengthen somewhat over the next day or two, but no real big threat here. We look towards the intertropical convergence zone, though. We see a pretty good cluster of thunderstorms. We'll be watching this area south of Acapulco for any potential development. We have that front that is stalled right down here across the southeast. It's triggering the showers and storms over the northern Gulf and into Florida, but nothing that portends to develop anytime soon, while the Caribbean generally dominated by this trough of low pressure extending from the Western Caribbean into the Atlantic. As we put this one into motion for you, this satellite picture will, well, we'll go to gray. Now, we will see the showers and storms there firing up around Cuba. They will dissipate, but that's primarily associated with that trough of low pressure. Eastern Caribbean looking in pretty good shape right now, as all the disturbances have very little chance of developing. As we look towards Africa and check out the situation, a pretty good little wave coming off the coast of Africa right now, a little early in the season, but we'll monitor it for any continued development. Right now, we want to...
Big problems for Hawaii with a big subtropical high delivering trade winds to the String of Pearls. A little bit further south, the intertropical convergence zone culminates in a new tropical storm, and that one's getting stronger almost by the hour. A little bit rainy in parts of the Western Gulf on into the Caribbean, and pretty good weather in most of the tropical Atlantic. Let's take a look at this in motion. We've been watching it now since last night. It did calm down. This was very early this morning. The thunderstorm tops had a bit of a lull, but now recently it looks like they blossomed again. The curvature is very good. It's really on its way to becoming a hurricane. Let's take a look at the statistics on it right now. Fausto, this the sixth named storm of the season in the Pacific, well south-southeast now, the tip of the Baja, Cabo San Lucas, moving west-northwest, so generally away from the Mexican coast. Winds are 65 miles an hour, so it only has to be 74 miles an hour sustained to be a hurricane. Forecast is for sometime tomorrow that will happen. Other than some ocean swells hitting the coast and some squalls and showers, it looks like this is more of a problem for the shipping interests right now. Let's take a look at some other...
Behind in that regard. Not so certainly in the Pacific. We're up now to Fausto, which is the sixth named storm. Fausto is a hurricane, and let's go ahead and have a look at that. In fact, we'll put this into motion now, and we'll show you what the motion has been. It's moving toward the northwest at about 12 miles an hour. We don't see much of any change in that. It kind of died down a little bit yesterday evening and then re-intensified a little bit this morning as we see a few more thunderstorms around the center. That little island right there we were about 12 hours ago, that's the island of Socorro. And they report about every 6 hours. Now, we didn't get a report from there when they had the strongest winds, but we do know that they got about 4 inches of rain, more than 4 inches of rain just in the last 24 hours, and it looks as if the rain's just about to taper off there. Now, we're watching this to see whether we might get some moisture up in the southwestern part of the United States. Right now, we believe that after about 12 hours, this is going to get over much colder water, weaken rapidly, so any moisture that gets into the southwestern U.S. we think will be minimal. Now let's look at the particulars on Fausto, and here it is, as we said, top winds 85 miles an hour. It is centered 225 miles southwest of Cabo San Lucas, which is right there at the tip of the Baja Peninsula, once again moving toward the northwest at about 10 to 12 miles an hour. Now let's go ahead and look in the Gulf of Mexico.
A little more pronounced now. Off of Mexico and in the western Gulf of Mexico, we have a lot of clouds. Let's take a look at our big picture. You can see the Caribbean pretty quiet, although there is a tropical wave in the islands. Also another tropical wave right about over the area. Say draw a line from near Tampa down to the Yucatan Peninsula, and west of there it's not too bad, but east of there we are seeing a lot of showers. A couple of inches of rain fell today around Key West. Western Gulf, upper level low pressure area. Then off Mexico, there's nothing too organized down in this area, say south of Acapulco, but it does bear watching. And we do have a weakening storm now. Had a hurricane, Hurricane Fausto, but it ran into the colder water, and that was its death knell. And now it's just a tropical storm and really weakening quite rapidly. Right now the winds are 65 miles an hour, moving west-northwest away from land areas, and that's about the closest land you can find, 420 miles west of Cabo San Lucas. And for anybody out there tracking, 23.1 north and 116.6 west. That is the Lat Lan. Meanwhile, looking at the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of clouds, a lot of showers. Here's our tropical wave, and as we see normally in a tropical wave, all the heavier rain is east of the trough axes, and therefore we've had the rainfall today. Key West, a lot of rain, had some warnings out around Sarasota and also Manatee County in Florida. But north of roughly an I-4 line, it dries out quite a bit. Here again, an upper level low in the western Gulf around the Mexico-Texas border. Bears watching, but any development would be very slow to occur. Caribbean, pretty quiet. We have that tropical wave out there. By the way, I want to go back to Fausto and put that into motion for you very quickly, and want to show you what's happening as our system has weakened considerably. You can see it looked pretty promising about 24 hours ago. There it was, a hurricane, but now it's moving into the colder water and really falling apart. And if you do have any travel plans over by, say, around Manzanillo or Puerto Vallarta or Acapulco, things are looking good at this stage.
In the Atlantic, we haven't had anything out there yet that's any kind of a threat. We still don't have anything at all. In the Pacific, it's been very, very active. We've already had 6 named storms, and I think we're just about to get number 7. This, however, is Fausto, still classified as a storm. Our analysis is that this is probably less now than a tropical storm, and we think the Hurricane Center will say that the next time we have an advisory, which will be sometime late this afternoon. In the meantime, we do have a new depression. This one centered 225 miles south of Acapulco. That one seems to be developing. We think that's going to be a tropical storm. The name will be Genevieve, but it's moving toward the northwest, almost parallel to the coast of Mexico. Quite a lot of rain this morning along the coast right in the Acapulco area. In the Gulf of Mexico, a little build-up down here in the Bay of Campeche, no organization. We continue to see a very active tropical wave in the eastern Gulf. That's moving on to the west, and it also extends down here in the Caribbean Sea. We'll take a shot of the Caribbean, put this into motion. This is getting into an area that might become a little bit more favorable in another day or so. We're going to have to see. Right now, certainly nothing to worry about at all. Let's go out and look farther out in the Atlantic Ocean. We'll be showing you this picture now because in mid-July we begin to watch this area a bit closer. We have a little bit of a disturbed area out here, several hundred miles east of the windwards, moving toward the west. That also not showing any signs of organization. Let's come back now to Bill Schubert. He'll be right there. We don't have anything to worry you about in the Atlantic or the Caribbean Sea or the Gulf of Mexico. Indeed, that's been the case ever since the hurricane season began. We haven't had a depression there since about the middle of May. Hurricane season in the Atlantic begins the 1st of June. It's been pretty quiet. It is today. Don't see anything that we would even need to worry a little bit about as far as this possibility of it developing any further in the next couple of days. The Pacific, though, off the coast of Mexico has been just the opposite. We've had a very large number of storms already. As a matter of fact, this is Genevieve, and this, if you count down the alphabet, we'll discover that this is number 7. It started in May. We had quite a number in June, and I think this is the second one or so in July. This is moving toward the west-northwest about 15 miles an hour. As you can see here, it's centered some 450 miles to the west-southwest of Acapulco. It's moving away from the coast. They had some rain yesterday at Acapulco, and as a matter of fact, it picked up about an inch, and no rain there at all today. Manzanillo is right about there. They are reporting a little bit of light rain. So far, we don't have any amounts. I don't think it's been very much. I don't think it will be very much. Now let's look at a different picture. This one we can put into motion. We're looking at 10 hours or so. Here it was 10 hours ago, and there it is now. You can see it rolling right along, and even though the thunderstorms have died down a little bit, you don't want to think that means that it's decreasing, because we see quite a bit of diurnal variation from time to time. What you need to look at is the banding, see how well it's organized. And this would stand very well organized, so we do think it's going to increase. It'll be a hurricane, and perhaps it'll be a little bit over minimal hurricane strength before all is said and done. Now we'll take you farther.
We're fairly busy in the intertropical convergence zone from Central America right on across deep into the Pacific Ocean, and right in through here we have a hurricane still. Genevieve has still got winds of 85 miles an hour, moving west-northwest at 9 miles an hour. It's 515 miles west-southwest of Cabo San Lucas, which is right here on the tip of the Baja Peninsula, and is moving on out into the Pacific. Heading for colder water, should start to decline in strength before too long. Still thunderstorms in the Gulf of Mexico, that old front, rare occurrence coming down off the Texas coast. A cold front this time of the year is rather unusual. showers and thunderstorms continue to flow on to the north across Florida and up the east coast, but not nearly the flow that we had earlier. Tropical wave moving across the eastern Caribbean Sea. There's the Windward Islands right there. That is Puerto Rico. They're getting some rain. Upper level low south of the Bahamas could work across parts of Florida over the next couple of days, and as it does, we could see it bring some more rain. We have a wider view of this on the satellite photograph. We can take a look at that. Put it into motion for you. You can see what's been going on. There's that wave flaring up now as it works its way onto the west a bit more. Here's our upper level low south of the Bahamas. There are the thunderstorms in the Gulf of Mexico. You can see the thunderstorms in Central America and offshore there. No problem, however. Let's go into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's the bulge of Africa, and here's the bulge of South America. That's off the Amazon River there. These tropical waves keep coming off of Africa. This one came off 3-4 days ago. It's continuing to work east, but it's much reduced from what it was. This looks very impressive, having just come off the coast. Well, it has a long way to go to get to the Windward and Leeward Islands. We'll have to wait and see what happens to that. We will continue to monitor it. A look at the current weather and the forecast with
are compared to last year, for example. It turns out if you look back on all previous years that we've had at least one named storm about almost 60% of the time by this time. Now last year we already had Allison and Barry out in the Atlantic by this time. In fact, we had 4 storms start up in July, but 2 of them started at the very end of July, one on the 30th and one on the 31st. On the Pacific, though, it's been more active than it was last year. Right now in the Pacific we've had 7 named storms. And at this time last year, we had just 4. We have the latest one of these out here. This is Genevieve, and still classified as a hurricane, although the top winds, we have a new advisory just out of the Hurricane Center. The top winds are down to 75 miles an hour. It's centered, well, it is still moving toward the northwest at about 9 miles an hour. It's at 22.7 and 120.7, and moving still toward the west-northwest. Now, we think this is going just about to get over colder water. There's much, much colder water out here to the west, and we think it's going to diminish and do so pretty fast. By this time tomorrow, I think we'll have just a weak tropical storm out there at best, and soon after that, it's going to be down to a depression. So we can just about forget Genevieve as it moves off toward the west-northwest. We have a lot of very interesting weather to show you in the Gulf of Mexico, a tremendous thunderstorm complex. This has been over land. This is the same one that produced 7 or 8 inches of rain or more in south-central Texas, and some of these very big thunderstorms are now getting out over the Gulf of Mexico. This is not the way, though, the tropical system develops. We don't see any pressure falls there to mount to anything at all, and we'll be watching that in case something does show, but we don't think we're going to have to do it. Not very much in the eastern part of the Gulf. We do have a big thunderstorm complex, though, out east of Florida, and what we're looking at here essentially is a low in the upper atmosphere. And that extends from, well, through the Bahamas down into the Caribbean, actually. High pressure building behind that, all that moving off toward the west. Let's put this area in motion. We'll show you what the motion has been here over about the last 12 hours or so. And you can see that these are advancing toward the west. We don't see a whole lot of change in the pattern. And it is going to be moving toward Florida, and we think enhance the showers and thunderstorms over Florida by tomorrow. There you can see these tremendous thunderstorms out in the western Gulf that have moved off the Texas coast. Now let's go farther east, and we'll take a look there if we can get farther east, and we'll show you the, well, here's the area off the coast of Africa, and we have one fairly good tropical wave there. We've had a number of them the last couple days that have been stronger than any we've seen this year. These are all advancing off toward the west, and we don't really see anything there that seems to be developing. We'll let you know, though, right away if there's any change.
The time to start to think about what would happen, what necessary precautions would I have to take care of if a hurricane were moving into the area. Again, that's Hurricane Awareness Week for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, July 21st to 28th. Think about it and get prepared before the season moves in on you. We'll talk about a hurricane. We'll talk about a tropical depression in the Atlantic. There's a tropical storm in the Pacific as well as a hurricane. Hurricane Hernan, as well as tropical storm Iselle, will continue to track on off towards the west. Very powerful hurricane right now. We'll look at the area of the Caribbean moving into the Atlantic, and again about that tropical depression in just a second. In fact, that's where we're headed first. Give you a little geography, a little land reference here. This is the west coast of Africa right here, and this is the northeastern coastline of South America. This particular feature is what we're interested in right here. It's the second tropical depression of the Atlantic season. First one, if you'll remember, several weeks ago, formed near the Cuba area. This one is sitting just about out in the middle of the Atlantic, about 9 degrees to the north, 45 degrees to the west. Will continue to scoot on off towards the west at about 15 miles an hour. A different satellite vantage point of it so you can get reference to the United States. Here's the eastern seaboard of the United States. This is Florida, down through Cuba, the Caribbean area. This would be around the Windward Islands right in here. In fact, we're going to put that into motion so you can see what's happened during the course of the day. Again, this is about 10 degrees north latitude. That cuts right through here in the extreme northern areas of South America, about 45 degrees to the west, continuing to move on off towards the west at about 15 miles an hour. Now, we look back through the historical tracks in the past. We've determined that none of the 3 previous documented formations in this area, the times of the year, this time of year, in 1887, 1909, or 1944 have ever reached a hurricane strength during their lifetime. However, what's different with this feature in 1990 is there is a pronounced high aloft north of the system. In this case, it may provide a better environment for it to grow, so we'll definitely keep a close on it. It's just too early to tell whether this will become a hurricane or not. Definitely keep a close on it. A tropical depression located about 1,070 miles to the east of Trinidad in areas of the Windward Islands. Continue to move on off towards the west at 17. Winds are reported about 35 miles an hour. Exact location, if you're plotting along with us, is 9.5 north, 45.5 to the west. That's about 1,070 miles east of Trinidad. Let's come into the Caribbean area and discovering how there is some thunderstorms still flaring up east of Florida, but for the most part, Cuba, Hispaniola, moving out through Puerto Rico, very quiet, as well as most of the Gulf of Mexico around the Bay of Campeche area. They are flaring up with a few thunderstorms, but at this particular point in the game, not of major concern. Head out to the Pacific to discover that tropical storm I was describing to you. Iselle continues to be about 320 miles southwest of Acapulco, moving west-northwest at 9 at 75-mile-an-hour winds, expected to increase on up into the 80 to 90-mile-an-hour category at a position at 14.55, excuse me, that's 14.55, 104.1 to the west. I think that should be north instead of a 5 there. And very close, just to the left of that, on your screen is Hurricane Hernan. And again, that continues to be a very powerful hurricane. Winds at 130, gusts up to 155 miles an hour. 565 miles south-southwest of Cabo San Lucas, moving northwest at 7. We'll keep a close eye on both the features in the Atlantic and the Pacific. You stay tuned to the Weather Channel. In fact, right now, here's the latest from George Elliott on U.S. weather.
Storms down over the Pacific. Here's the storms and thunderstorm variety in western Texas, north of...
It's appropriate that we point out that it is Hurricane Awareness Week for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and certainly the eastern part of Puerto Rico and the islands of Vieques and Culebra, and especially St. Croix and the Virgin Islands got the full brunt last year of Hurricane Hugo. And I would point out, though, that the depression that we're looking at out in the Atlantic is so far to the south, we think it's unlikely to affect Puerto Rico as it moves on to the west. It looks like if it comes into the Caribbean at all, it would be pretty much in the southern Caribbean Sea. Still have a powerful hurricane out here. This is Hernan. Iselle, not quite so strong. We'll detail the both of those later. And we didn't point out that out in the Atlantic, that's the depression there, and we have another perhaps little low-pressure circulation out there along the intertropical convergence zone, so it is active. Right now, though, none of these really show much indication of developing into a storm immediately. Here's the latest information on the tropical depression, centered at 9.5 and 51.0, and that is 700 miles now, just about due east of Trinidad. It's staying at a very low latitude, having a little trouble, I think, getting organized. We'll talk more about that in a second. Another wave up there we wanted to show you northeast of Antigua. Let's put the picture in motion now and show you what the motion has been. This is the depression right there now, centered 700 miles to the east of the island of Trinidad. And as we look at that, we're hard-pressed as we look to the south to see any westerly winds, and that raises a possibility anyway that this may be just a wave. We're going to have to examine that more carefully. Right now, though, it's still classified as a depression. And even though we see a big cluster of thunderstorms up here northeast of Antigua, we see some pretty good westerly winds blowing through it, and we don't see much reflection at the surface, so we don't think that's going to organize. Now let's go farther west into the Caribbean Sea, and as we go farther toward the west, we don't see anything there. Can we get that picture back toward, yeah, there we are. We've already seen just about all of this. We have some good thunderstorms, the concentration north of Panama, and that's about it.
And it looks like the clouds continue to linger along the frontal boundary, this time stretching a little bit farther to the south,
than what we had about 24 hours ago. This time from Texas all the way in the mid-Atlantic states to the north of it, very pleasant. When you consider July, this is supposed to be the peak of summertime. It's supposed to be the hottest readings of the year, and most of the country well below normal. We'll look at that in just a couple of minutes. But that frontal boundary continues to be the boundary line between the cooler, drier air filtering southward and that hot, steamy tropical air working its way into the southern states, and pretty hot stuff as well in the southwest. Might be a few showers and thunderstorms here this afternoon and on up into the northeast along that cloud shield. With New England, especially northern Maine, it feels like a late September day with temperatures in the 60s and some light rain, moderate at times. Temperatures this morning, we've established a few records, including at Laramie, Wyoming, tying at 41. Kansas City, 57. Even Hollywood, Florida, down to 67. All record lows established. What's going on? We're talking about how temperatures still running well below normal. The numbers on the map with the minus signs represent below normal, plus represents above normal. And in many cases, the midsection of the country, from the Great Lakes to the Central Plains, all the way down into western Texas, minus 10, minus 13, minus 12. Very cold for July standards. And even in the plus category, they're only about plus 2, plus 3, or 5. So it looks like we're actually shifting a little bit farther to maybe a pattern like April or May than we are seeing in July. Kind of strange. June ended up being the warmest in San Antonio. Now it's the wettest July on record. Whew, what a strange weather pattern we're having. Aren't you glad you got the Weather Channel and know all this stuff? 84 in Boston, 72 with showers around Nashville, 75 in Oklahoma City behind the front, still ahead of it Brownsville, steamy 86, 70 in Burbank and hazy, and 58 cloudy conditions coming in around Seattle. Current national map, there's the front. There's the boundary between the hot tropical moist air surging northward and the cooler drier air out of Canada. It's settling in from around Dallas-Fort Worth all the way up into around Rome, New York. Showers and thunderstorms continue to develop along that front. Could be heavy variety today, anywhere from the New England states all the way down the mid-Atlantic area. So stay tuned to the Weather Channel for the very latest. Anywhere along that front, there could be some strong winds, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, gusty winds, or maybe some hail. Again, stay with the Weather Channel. We'll keep you updated. Latest radar vantage point, what's happening across America. Well, over the last 6 or 7 hours, to bring you up to date, you can see how the showers continue to scoot on off towards the northeast, including the action from Memphis all the way back into central areas of Texas. Nil and void of any precipitation echoes northern plains, pick up a little bit of thunderstorm activity on up into Idaho and Montana over the last hour or two. Closer look, we'll head to the northeast and discover how the showers and thunderstorms continue to march out of the Empire State and headed in towards New Hampshire, Vermont, and sliding up into areas of Maine. In fact, northern areas of Maine still reporting some rain there. They continue to pull on off towards the northeast. They will go from Burlington, Vermont, all the way back into around Albany now, just to the west of Albany, working its way down towards Binghamton. Syracuse already has seen a record rainfall for this particular date because of all the heavy rain that fell earlier this morning. And additional rains continue to build up around the tri-state region, all the way up and around Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And we'll continue to update you on that situation. Again, here's what it looked like earlier this morning before it continued to move on off towards the northeast. Elsewhere, we'll examine the showers and thunderstorms that continue to build up, this time back down in the Lone Star State of Texas into the Mid-South region, where some of those showers and thunderstorms are building up. Heavy thunderstorms in the Houston area this hour, all the way back up to around Lufkin. And along the front, stretches from Longview to Del Rio, there could be some flooding problems, especially around Edwards and Kinney County, where they've already seen 1 to 2 inches of rainfall in about a 1 to 2 hour period. Need to call on the jet stream to check out our forecast.
It is Tropical Storm Arthur. Right now it is centered east of the island of Trinidad, about 160 miles. The top wind's 40 miles an hour, moving toward the west at 20 miles an hour. In the meantime, we still have our twin hurricanes out in the Pacific. We'll get back to those in a moment. We have another disturbed area way out there in the Atlantic we're looking at a little bit, and even one up here off the coast of the Carolinas and Florida, which if it hangs around a couple more days, it might get a little bit interesting. Well, here's the latest information on Tropical Storm Arthur, and as you can see, it is centered at 10.7 north and 58.5 west, and that is 160 miles east of Trinidad. And the top winds are 40 miles an hour, and it is moving toward the west at 20. And down here you can see it's located right there, and right there you see what the previous track has been. Moving a tad north of due west, but mostly toward the west, and we expect to see that continue. Now, at the rate it's going, it's not going to be more than 8 hours or so away from the island, so it should move into the Caribbean Sea during the night. There are warnings up. These have been issued by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and they do include Trinidad and Tobago. It includes Grenada and the Grenadines, not very far up the chain there in the windward so far. And of course that means just be alert for winds 40 miles an hour or higher. Also, quite a lot of rain is likely to fall, we think. Might see 2 to 5 inches, enough to get some flash flooding. There's the latest picture of it. Once again, let's go ahead and put this picture into motion for you and show you what the motion has been now over the last, say 12 hours. There it was early this morning, and you can see there that it's marching steadily off to the west, getting a little bit better organized. The outflow in the upper atmosphere is very good. It has its own little high already generated above that, and that's indicative, we think, of further strengthening. There's that area off the coast of Florida. It's just kind of a weak trough of low pressure area. Not concerned about it yet, but again, if it's going to sit there for a while, we might be a little concerned about it later on. Let's look at the rest of the Caribbean Sea, and the big picture here, there's that disturbance way out in the Atlantic, and here's the Caribbean. A very intense area of thunderstorms off Nicaragua, but we think that this is going to move westward mostly inland in Nicaragua and Honduras primarily before it can develop. At least that's the way it looks right now. The Gulf of Mexico is about free of clouds, nothing there to worry about at all. These are the twin hurricanes. The Iselle, the first one, 115 miles an hour, and that's centered 395 miles southeast of Cabo San Lucas. And Hernan is tapered off a little bit down to 140 miles an hour, still a huge, massive hurricane, and that is sending some swells up toward the southward facing beaches in California, and we'll be reporting to you on that. In the meantime, here's Tom.
Active night in the tropics. We have 2 hurricanes in the Pacific and a tropical depression. Plus, we have a new tropical storm in the Atlantic. Here's Carl with all the details.
Thank you, Janetta, and we'll take a look at Tropical Storm Arthur right here, approaching the entrance to the Caribbean Sea around the Leeward and Windward Islands. And we've been seeing some of the reports around Barbados at the present time. Winds generally from the east-northeast at about 15 to 20 miles per hour, and some rain showers, nothing very strong at the present time. Let's set this into motion for you and let you see some of the showers and thunderstorms and the movement of Arthur. As we set this into motion, we'll let you see some of the clouds and the showers and thunderstorms. And we're watching the movement generally still towards the west at about 20 miles per hour. And we are watching also this area back here. In the next day or so, we may have a depression forming on the heels of Arthur. So definitely a little active right now out in the Atlantic Ocean. But Arthur is the main concern right now as it continues to work its way towards the west-northwest. And we are watching more of a gathering of strength in sections of the center. We'll show you the latest coordinates right now of Arthur, and we'll show you the latest position, and it's at 11.0 north, 59.8 west, or 65 miles east of Tobago. And as I mentioned, they're receiving winds from the east-northeast at about 15 to 20 miles per hour. There's the pressure, and it's causing some warnings to be issued, especially south around Tobago, Trinidad, Grenada, and the Grenadines are under tropical storm warnings. That means they could experience tropical storm force winds as the center continues to work its way towards the Caribbean Sea. Now, the good news is that at this point, the expected forecast will take it well south of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and also Jamaica. So we'll have to keep an eye on that to see if there's any change in that possible forecast track of Arthur. But definitely right now, it'll bring some rains, maybe up to 3 to 5 inches around Trinidad, Tobago, and also Grenada. So we'll have to watch that as a form of the heavy rain may be the biggest threat of Arthur. Elsewhere, we are watching another area of thunderstorms here. It looks like an area of high pressure in the upper level, so these clusters of storms get back out over the Caribbean Sea. We may have to be concerned there. A little closer look there as these thunderstorms are pretty much close to land, so we don't think much will develop anytime soon. But if these thunderstorms work their way back into the Gulf of Honduras, then we'll have to keep an eye on the possibility of some intensification there. Also, a trough right here causing these thunderstorms. If anything developed here, it would be slow to occur, but this area of clouds and storms has been around a couple of days, so we'll definitely have to watch that. Gulf of Mexico is pretty quiet, but we are watching now. Hurricane Iselle, maximum sustained winds 120 miles per hour. And right ahead of it, we have Hernan. That's winds are now up to 130. It's been as high as 150 miles per hour. And note, this is a depression, so we have 3 tropical systems right here in a line. But the biggest concern with Hernan is the south and the south-southwesterly swells it's sending up towards the coast of California, expecting some of the breakers to be anywhere from 4 to 6 feet. And some of the exposed beaches could see breakers up to 8 feet. So definitely a dangerous situation if you are doing some traveling or some swimming along the shores of California.
A little more serious, we believe. We have a reconnaissance aircraft out there, and the indications are that the hurricane has begun to pick up some strength. Still classified as the tropical storm. It's still classified as 60 miles an hour in the noon advisory, but we are seeing a little bit stronger winds than that from the reconnaissance airplane. We'll show you the particulars on it. This, bear in mind now, is based on the noon advisory. At that time, centered at 12.5 and 63.3, and that's 425 miles to the southeast of Ponce, which is right here on the southwest tip of Puerto Rico, moving toward the west-northwest at 15 miles an hour. There's been rather a significant drop in the pressure this morning. It's now down to 995 millibars, and that is 29.38 inches, and that rate of fall seems to be continuing. Now let's go ahead and look at a different picture here, and also point out that we have a pretty active tropical wave out here about 1,000 miles. We'll focus in on this, get in a little bit closer, put the picture in motion for you now, and show you what the motion has been over the last several hours. And can we get this in motion? There we are. There's the, there it is, moving toward the west-northwest about 15 miles an hour, but getting better organized. The center of circulation right here, it seems almost to be developing an eye. Now, we haven't talked about this in terms of hurricane, but I think we have to recognize now that there is a good possibility that this is going to be a hurricane. And it's moving kind of toward the northwest. We think it's going to clear Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We're not sure yet, though, about the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba. We're going to have to watch that very carefully as the week progresses. Now, we have another little system up here. The Hurricane Center is going to send a reconnaissance aircraft out there to check it out. That's about 600 miles east of Jacksonville. The recon will be out there tomorrow. And there's that wave. I just want to show you that very quickly out here that seems to be developing a little bit as the afternoon goes on. Now let's go farther west, and we'll show you the storms out here in the Pacific. This first one is Iselle, and the top wind's 110 miles an hour. And here's the other one, was up to 150, now down to 120. Still a powerful hurricane. This one is sending big swells up toward the beaches in Southern California. Now back to Tom Moore. Of course, this one is close enough to the United States, so we've got to be watching it very carefully, and we're certainly going to do that. As you can see, it is centered now at 28.4 north, 76.0 west, and that's just about 275 miles east of Cape Canaveral, Florida, and the top winds are 35 miles an hour. Now, this depression is moving toward the west, but as you can see, it's very, very slow indeed. It's moving only about 3 miles an hour. Now, what we expect to see happen here is for this to continue to drift westward, perhaps for 12 hours, perhaps for 24, and then after that, we're expecting it to turn a bit toward the north. We also expect it to increase in strength, and there's a very good chance that it will be a tropical storm tomorrow, perhaps even as early as tonight. A reconnaissance aircraft is going to check that out about 8 o'clock Eastern Time to find out exactly how strong it is. We've been watching this now for several days. It's continued to get better organized, and today quite a lot better organized, and we see some banding around the center, and that tells us that we have a tropical type system. Let's go ahead now and put a picture into motion for you and talk about that. And this, first of all, this is a depression, and you can see that over the course of the past 12 hours or so, it has become a good deal better organized as it moves on very, very slowly now toward the west. We would also point out that down here at the bottom of your picture, this is the remnants of Arthur, which is no longer even a depression. Couldn't find a circulation center down there today when the aircraft went out, so this now has been downgraded to a tropical wave, and it continues to move pretty rapidly toward the west over the open Caribbean Sea. Now let's take a wider shot of the Caribbean and look at that. And well, this is the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing really to show you in the Gulf at all to be concerned with. And we're going to take you out to the Pacific now and have a look at the situation there. We have Iselle, which is now 80 miles an hour. It is moving toward the west-northwest at 7 miles an hour, and the top winds are 80 miles an hour. Hernan, which was once 150 miles an hour, is now barely holding on as a hurricane. The winds are 75 miles an hour. I had one more wave I wanted to show you there, but I lost the picture. It's a tropical wave out east of the Leeward Islands. That one is not developing any, so nothing to be concerned about right away. In fact, we now have a hurricane once again out there on the last advisory from the Hurricane Center. It is now clocked at 65 miles an hour, actually 75 miles an hour. We don't have that new coordinate in for you. The pressure is 983 millibars, and that's 20.3 inches, but As we look at this morning, it continues to get just a little bit better organized once again. Yesterday we were seeing a lot of shear out there, and today we don't really see that. Let's go ahead and look at this picture, and we'll put it into motion for you and show you what kind of motion we're looking at here since about daybreak this morning. There's the center right there, and you can see as it gets daylight right close now to where the center is, we have some pretty good buildups, and that's indicative of a system that's a little bit better organized. And even though it's a couple hundred miles from Bermuda, they're getting gusts, Bermuda right down here, they're getting gusts of 50 miles an hour there. And it's about 400 miles now from Hatteras, or 450, about the same distance from Atlantic City. So there's a very large circulation around this, and it's stirring up the ocean over a pretty wide area. So you're going to see some pretty high surf all the way from Cape Cod down to Cape Hatteras. In fact, up around the New Jersey coast, it may be increasing a little bit today, so watch out if you're out there. And do be careful. Now let's go ahead and look at the rest of the tropics, and we don't have anything much to worry about in the Caribbean, but on out in the Atlantic Ocean we have a system. This is about 1,300 miles east, southeast of the Windward Islands. That's getting a little bit better organized as time goes by, and the Hurricane Center is going to be checking that out for you. And you can see here that another system had just come off Africa, and there's the one that we're watching that's about 1,300 miles or so east of the islands. Looking at the full disk, we don't have anything out in the Pacific to be worried about anymore. But in the Gulf of Mexico, we haven't had to worry much about the Gulf. There's a possibility now that we have a little circulation developing out here, and the Hurricane Center thinks possibly a depression might form there, and they intend to have a reconnaissance aircraft go out there and check it out. Now let's come back to the U.S. and see what we have to offer here.
Of Bertha churning away out there over the Atlantic, east of the eastern seaboard. You want to know the latest on it? Well, here we go. If you're tracking it on a hurricane tracking chart, its coordinates are 35.3 degrees north, 67.4 degrees west. That puts Bertha about 675 miles now to the south-southwest of Halifax in Nova Scotia. Winds now around the circulation are at 75 miles an hour. It continues to move off to the northeast. We're getting reports now from the island of Bermuda that they're getting winds of 50 miles an hour right now. We're going to keep a very close eye on this system here. And, of course, John Hope, our hurricane expert, will be in at 48 past the hour to bring you even more details. So stick around for that.
States, at least the severest type storms, it's primarily, of course, the East Coast or the Gulf Coast. Now, granted, we do occasionally get some, at least, side effects of some Pacific hurricanes over the Southwest, and of course, they've even caused massive amounts of flooding. You might remember back a couple of autumns ago, massive flooding in Oklahoma, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Caney River, thanks to an old Pacific hurricane, but nothing like that in sight. What we do have, though, is Bertha. A minimal hurricane, granted, moving north-northeastward, and if it continues on the course here, as you can see, it would affect, well, potentially, eventually, in Nova Scotia, or that part of the Maritimes just east of Nova Scotia in Canada. Maximum sustained winds 80 miles per hour. Here's the central pressure, 974 millibars. You can see the latest particulars here, about 515 miles to the south-southwest of Halifax in Nova Scotia. Take you back to early this evening, the visible satellite picture showing the eye beautifully here, and you can see that the showers and storms have wrapped themselves around that low-level circulation center. And you might remember last night at this time, late Sunday evening, we were looking at most of the thunderstorms off to the northeast. In fact, essentially they were all off to the northeast of the low-pressure center, the circulation center. That usually means that these storms are not going to well, let's say strengthen significantly. And in fact, this one hasn't. The sustained winds last night this time were 70 miles per hour. Now they're 80, so it goes from a tropical storm to a very minimal hurricane. But nonetheless, some gusty winds associated with this. Okay, let's look at this. Here's the center. Let's take the latest picture. And there's the center right there. We color enhance the picture here now as we have lost the daylight, so obviously we can't take a visible picture. But as you can see, the direction of movement indeed is north-northeastward. Let's go ahead and put this into motion and show you what's been happening over the last 10 to 12 hours or so. And the circulation showing up beautifully here with big thunderstorms rotating around and about the center. Bermuda, just a indirect glancing hit, though at times they did see wind gusts in excess of 40 miles per hour today, even though the center of the hurricane was well to the north and northwest. Let's go ahead and show you, if we can, what's going on in parts of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. Basically, we could show you a little bit of unsettled weather just off the picture there, but don't think anything is likely to happen. We'll certainly keep an eye on a little area of disturbed weather out there in, let's say, the north central northwestern sections of the Gulf of Mexico, but not too terribly concerned about it. As we take a look at what's off the African coast here and off of South America, a couple of tropical waves, different vantage point right here. This one in particular may not be too far from being a depression, a pretty well-developed system. In fact, it's the best developed system thus far, I think, that we've seen come off Africa thus far this 1990 hurricane season. Let's go ahead and update you on what's going on. And